Ladies and gentlemen, let me start by saying something that may sound harsh, but it's the truth. Europe isn't preparing for peace. It's preparing its people for accepting war as inevitable. And the most dangerous war of all isn't just the one with Russia. It's the silent economic war being waged on the citizens of Europe themselves. You see, when politicians talk about security, they're often hiding the fact that their economic house is collapsing. When leaders point their fingers outward, it's usually to distract from the decay within. Fear is the oldest weapon of control. It's been used by kings, politicians, and empires to shape public behavior and bend collective will. When people are afraid, they stop thinking critically. They trade freedom for the illusion of safety and reason for the comfort of obedience. And that is exactly what's happening in Europe today. The public is being prepared, psychologically conditioned to accept hardship, restrictions, and sacrifice as the price of survival. But the real danger isn't what they're being told to fear. It's the subtle, creeping surrender of independence that comes when fear takes the driver's seat. The great tragedy of modern society is not that people are misinformed, but that they've stopped questioning the information they receive. When governments repeat, must prepare for war, it plants a seed in the public consciousness, a seed that grows into silent acceptance. People stop asking why and start asking when. They stop demanding truth and start preparing for orders. Fear narrows vision. It turns complex realities into simple narratives of versus them, heroes versus villains. And once that frame is set, leaders can do anything, print more money, raise more taxes, restrict more freedoms, and call it security. Fear doesn't protect you. It paralyzes you. It's the most powerful weapon ever created because it requires no bullets, no tanks, no soldiers, just words. The easiest way to control a population is not through force, but through fear of the unknown. And once that fear becomes normalized, even intelligent people begin to justify things they would have rejected just a few years earlier. They say, well, maybe this is necessary. Maybe this time it's different. No, it's not. The story changes, the slogans evolve, but the method remains the same. Keep the public anxious, keep them distracted, and they'll never ask where the real danger lies, which is in economic decay, loss of sovereignty, and the erosion of critical thought. The strongest person in the room isn't the one with the loudest opinion or the deepest fear. It's the one who can stay calm when everyone else is losing control. The person who refuses to panic, who keeps thinking, who keeps questioning. That's real strength. That's leadership. Because while fear spreads like wildfire, reason spreads like light, slow at first, but impossible to extinguish once it starts burning. And history has always rewarded those who dared to stay rational in irrational times. When fear dominates, economies collapse, not because of external threats, but because citizens stop believing in themselves. They start waiting for governments to solve problems that governments created in the first place. It's a dangerous loop, one that turns self-reliant people into dependent followers. Every time you let fear make your choices, you give away a piece of your freedom. You stop building, you stop growing, and you start surviving instead of living. That's not protection. That's paralysis dressed as patriotism. The irony is that those who promote fear always promise safety, yet deliver instability. They claim to shield you from chaos while manufacturing it through bad policy, inflation, and endless intervention. And then, when their plans fail, they point to another enemy, another crisis, another distraction. But if you strip away the noise, you realize something profoundly. Fear only works on those who stop thinking. Once you begin to understand the system, once you see the patterns, fear loses its grip. Knowledge becomes your armor, truth becomes your weapon, and calm becomes your greatest strength. So when the media screams panic, when politicians urge you to brace yourself, when every headline tells you the world is ending, remember this: panic is profitable, but calm is powerful. Don't let fear make you a pawn in someone else's game. The most revolutionary act you can commit today is not rebellion, but rationality. Don't let fear guide your decisions. Let understanding guide them, because the world doesn't need more followers of fear. It needs more leaders of reason. And that starts with you refusing to let fear become your compass in a world built on confusion. A nation's real defense doesn't lie in its armies, its alliances, or its speeches. It lies in the strength of its economy and the independence of its people. Economic freedom is not just a financial concept, it's the backbone of sovereignty. Without it, every nation becomes vulnerable, not because of foreign invasion, but because of internal decay. When a country loses control of its money, its markets, and its productivity, it loses control of its destiny. And that's exactly where Europe stands today, mistaking dependence for stability and regulation for strength. The harsh reality is that no society has ever sustained prosperity by suffocating the very freedom that creates it. Economic freedom is the invisible armor that protects nations from collapse. When individuals are free to produce, innovate, and compete, they generate real wealth, not the artificial kind created by central banks, but the kind built on value, creativity, and effort. This is the wealth that can't be printed or borrowed. It's earned, not promised. Yet Europe's policymakers have traded that wealth for control, strangling small businesses with taxes, flooding markets with debt, and convincing citizens that government dependency is security. But dependency is never safety, it's silent enslavement. A nation addicted to handouts forgets how to stand on its own feet, and a generation raised to expect rescue stops building resilience. You can't have freedom without responsibility, and you can't have prosperity without risk. The more a government tries to protect its people from failure, the more it protects them from success. When you remove the consequences of bad decisions, you also remove the rewards of good ones. That's why Europe's economies are stagnating. They've replaced competition with compliance. They've built a system where growth is punished and dependency is rewarded. And no matter how many summits or stimulus packages they announce, they can't legislate their way to productivity. Real growth comes from liberty, not liability. Economic freedom gives people power, the power to create, to choose, to move, and to build. But when that power is centralized, innovation dies. Look at history. Every great civilization was built by people who were free to think and act independently. They didn't wait for permission. They created opportunity. Today, Europe waits for approval from committees, commissions, and central banks that have never produced anything except bureaucracy. How can you expect entrepreneurs to thrive when their every move is dictated by those who have never run a business, never met a payroll, never taken a real risk? It's economic insanity disguised as policy. When a government tells you it can stimulate an economy by printing money, what it's really doing is stealing value from the productive to subsidize the unproductive. Inflation isn't an accident. It's taxation without legislation. It punishes savers, rewards debtors, and transfers wealth from those who build to those who borrow. And the irony is, While politicians claim to fight inequality, they're the ones fueling it through inflation and overregulation. The people who work hardest end up with the least stability, while those closest to the money supply thrive in artificial abundance. That's not capitalism. That's corruption wrapped in economic jargon. Europe's future will not be determined by its military might or its political slogans, but by whether it chooses freedom over fear. A nation that controls its production, values its workers, and respects the power of the free market cannot be subdued, not by war, not by sanctions, not by economic blackmail, because true independence begins with self-reliance. People who can feed themselves, power themselves, and create for themselves will never be ruled by anyone else. That's the essence of strength, not in force, but in freedom. And that's the wake-up call Europe desperately needs. The greatest defense against collapse is not another bailout, not another treaty, not another promise. It's unleashing the potential of its own people. Let the innovators breathe. Let the entrepreneurs build. Let the workers keep more of what they earn. Because in the end, the most powerful weapon any nation possesses is not its arsenal, but its ability to produce, to adapt, and to grow without permission. Economic freedom is national strength, and any society that forgets this truth won't need an enemy to destroy it. It will do it all by itself. It's easy to believe in comforting lies when the truth feels unbearable. That's how civilizations decay, not through sudden collapse, but through the gradual surrender of honesty for convenience. When people trade truth for comfort, they begin to live in illusions that make them feel safe while slowly destroying their foundations. This is the real danger facing Europe today. Its leaders have mastered the art of comforting the public with narratives instead of confronting them with reality. They tell citizens that inflation is temporary, that debt is sustainable, and that endless government spending is progress. But you cannot build stability on denial. You cannot fix problems by pretending they don't exist. The moment a nation stops telling itself the truth, it starts writing its own obituary. There's something deeply human about wanting to believe that things will be fine, that someone else will solve the crisis, that the next policy or election will change everything. But the world doesn't reward wishful thinking. It rewards responsibility. Truth doesn't always feel good, but it's the only thing that keeps societies alive. When governments sugarcoat economic failure with slogans like shared sacrifice or green transition, what they're really doing is selling illusions at the price of your future. The hook is this: lies. Lies are always easier to sell than discipline. People want comfort, not correction. But comfort built on lies always ends in pain, and the longer the lie lasts, the deeper the pain becomes. Every major crisis in history began with people refusing to face the truth. Whether it was the housing bubble, the debt crisis, or currency collapses, the pattern is always the same. Warnings are ignored, critics are mocked, and the public is lulled into a sense of false security. Then one day, the illusion shatters, and everyone acts surprised. Europe is walking that path right now. Its leaders continue to promise prosperity through policies that have never worked. They print money to solve debt, borrow to fund consumption, and call it growth. But debt isn't growth. Printing isn't production. And pretending isn't progress. You can't fool economic gravity. The truth always catches up, and when it does, it doesn't negotiate. The strength of a society lies not in how comfortable it is, but in how honest it's willing to be. When people embrace uncomfortable truths, they gain power, the power to adapt, to change, And to rebuild, that's why those who speak the truth, even when it's unpopular, are the true patriots of any age. They understand that comfort without truth is a slow form of collapse. The leaders who promise safety without sacrifice are not protecting you. They're pacifying you. They're exchanging your strength for silence, your clarity for compliance. Real progress doesn't begin with promises. It begins with the courage to face what's wrong and fix it, not deny it. When you live in a world built on deception, truth becomes revolutionary. It exposes weakness, it threatens power, and it terrifies those who depend on confusion to maintain control. That's why truth tellers are often ridiculed at first and praised only after the damage is done. But those who cling to the truth early are always the ones standing when the storm passes. And here's the hook. The truth doesn't need you to believe in it to exist. It stands alone. Lies, on the other hand, require constant maintenance. They need propaganda, censorship, and distraction to survive. That's why corrupt systems fear truth, because it doesn't obey them. It breaks through even when buried under years of manipulation. Europe's crisis isn't just economic, it's moral. It's a refusal to admit mistakes, to confront failure, and to let reality guide policy instead of ideology. Until the truth becomes more valuable than comfort, nothing will change. You can't inflate your way out of debt, regulate your way into prosperity, or censor your way to unity. But you can face reality, no matter how painful it is, and rebuild from a place of integrity. That's what real strength looks like. Not denial, not distraction, but discipline. The courage to accept what's real and the wisdom to act on it. Because truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is the only foundation that never collapses. When governments prepare for war, citizens must prepare for independence. Because the greatest form of security doesn't come from armies or treaties. It comes from self-reliance. In times of global uncertainty, those who depend entirely on systems are the first to panic when those systems fail. But those who've built independence financially, mentally, and practically are the ones who not only survive but rise. The lesson of history is simple way. When the world becomes unstable, your stability must come from within. Governments may promise protection, but protection without empowerment is just dependency disguised as safety. Europe today is being told to prepare for conflict, to brace for harder times, to make sacrifices for the greater good, but rarely do they tell people how to truly prepare themselves, not just emotionally, but economically. Preparation doesn't mean waiting for instructions. It means taking initiative. It means learning how to protect your wealth from inflation, how to think critically when the narrative shifts, and how to build personal resilience when the institutions around you crumble. The hook is this: if you depend on the same system that's causing the problem to save you, you've already lost. Independence is your insurance policy against incompetence. Every era of uncertainty exposes a truth people often forget. Governments are reactive, not proactive. They don't prevent crises, they manage their consequences. And too often, that management comes at the expense of ordinary citizens. Taxes go up, purchasing power goes down, and savings evaporate while officials promise recovery that never arrives. That's why preparation must start with you. Learn how money works, understand how inflation steals silently from your future, and don't let convenience rob you of control. The people who thrive in turbulent times aren't the ones with privilege. They're the ones with knowledge. But preparation is more than just financial, it's mental. The world is filled with noise, fear-based headlines, endless distractions, Constant manipulation. If you let that consume you, you'll freeze. The real preparation is learning how to stay calm in chaos, to think when others panic, to analyze when others react. Because in every crisis, the majority always follows emotion, while the minority that stays rational makes the right decisions. History rewards clarity, not conformity. And when the world starts echoing the same fearful message, the bravest act you can take is to think for yourself. The great deception of modern society is the belief that the government will always step in, that it will protect, provide, and preserve. But governments don't create wealth. They redistribute it. They don't generate stability. They borrow it. And eventually, they run out of other people's money. When that happens, the illusion of security disappears overnight. That's why true preparation is not about fear. It's about foresight. Don't wait for systems to fail to realize how fragile they are. Build your independence while you still have the freedom to do so. Because once panic spreads, preparation becomes impossible. The hook is simple yet powerful. The more self-reliant you are, the freer you become. Independence isn't isolation, it's empowerment. It means having the ability to make choices without being dictated by circumstance or authority. It means knowing that even if the economy collapses or policies change, you have the tools, knowledge, and discipline to adapt. That's real strength, not the kind that comes from power, but the kind that comes from self-mastery. When everything feels uncertain, your best investment is in yourself, your skills, your judgment, your resilience. You don't control the markets, the media, or the policies, but you control how you respond to them. And that's what separates the prepared from the panicked. So while governments prepare for war, prepare for freedom, prepare to be the kind of person who doesn't need to be saved because you've already built the strength to stand on your own. That's the real preparation, not fear-driven, but purpose-driven. Because in the end, independence isn't just about survival, it's about sovereignty over your own life. Courage today is not found in following the crowd, but in standing against it when you know it's wrong. In a world where conformity has become a currency, saying no has become an act of rebellion. When propaganda is disguised as news, when silence is praised as loyalty, and when obedience is mistaken for unity, courage becomes the rarest and most valuable resource. The irony is that those who dare to question authority are branded as dangerous, when in truth, they are the last guardians of freedom. Throughout history, every great change, every real progress began with someone who refused to agree simply because it was easier. The hook is this: courage isn't about volume, it's about conviction. It's not about shouting the loudest, it's about standing firm when your voice shakes. The modern world has mastered the art of social conditioning. We're told what to think, what to fear, what to support, and most dangerously, what not to question. Governments, corporations, and media institutions have learned that control doesn't require force, it just requires conformity. The moment you stop questioning is the moment you stop thinking. And once thinking dies, freedom follows. Courage begins where comfort ends. It begins in that uncomfortable silence between what you believe and what you're told to believe. It's easy to nod along with the majority. It's much harder to pause and ask, is this true? Or who benefits if I believe this? Those simple questions, when asked sincerely, are acts of defiance in an age that rewards blind agreement. Courage has never been about winning popularity. It's been about preserving integrity. When everyone around you embraces convenience over principle, it takes extraordinary strength to stand alone. But that's the kind of strength our society desperately needs right now. Because when truth becomes controversial and lies become mainstream, silence becomes complicity. The price of courage might be discomfort, isolation, or criticism, but the price of cowardice is far higher. It's the slow erosion of your soul, your independence, and your ability to think freely. And the tragedy is most people never realize what they've lost until it's gone. We live in a time where standing for truth can cost you friends, status, or even your livelihood. But history always redeems the courageous. Every thinker, reformer, and innovator who challenged power was condemned before they were celebrated. Galileo was imprisoned for truth. Churchill was mocked before being honored, and countless others were ridiculed before being remembered. What makes courage powerful is that it doesn't need validation. It doesn't wait for applause. It acts because it must. It speaks because silence would be worse. And it stands not because it's easy, but because it's right. The hook is simple. Courage doesn't ask permission. It demands purpose. When you dare to speak the truth in a world built on deception, you disrupt the comfort of those who depend on lies. That's why real courage often feels lonely. But loneliness is a small price to pay for authenticity. You don't need the crowd's approval when you have the clarity of your own conscience. The world may not thank you now, but the future will. Every act of courage, no matter how small, plants a seed of change. It reminds others that they're not alone in their doubts, not crazy for questioning, not wrong for resisting. Courage inspires courage. It's contagious in ways fear can never be. And that's what the powerful fear most. They don't fear riots or protests as much as they fear individuals who can't be intimidated into silence. Because one courageous mind can expose 1,000 lies. One person who refuses to bow gives others permission to stand. The world changes not when the majority wakes up, but when a few brave individuals refuse to sleep through the truth. So when the noise grows loud, when the pressure builds, when the crowd demands compliance, remember this: courage is quiet but unstoppable. It doesn't need approval to be right. It only needs the strength to endure, because in a world built on fear, courage isn't just resistance. It's freedom in its purest form. Peace has never been achieved through deception, and prosperity has never been sustained through denial. Every conflict, every collapse, every crisis the world has endured began with a refusal to face economic truth. The idea that you can build stability on debt, print wealth out of thin air, or sanction your way to security is a fantasy, one that Europe seems determined to repeat. You cannot have peace without honesty, and you cannot have honesty without confronting the uncomfortable realities of bad policy, reckless spending, and moral decay in leadership. The hook is this: wars are not born on battlefields, they are born in budgets. Economic lies are the fuse that ignites global chaos, and right now that fuse is burning fast. The path to peace starts with transparency. When leaders manipulate numbers, redefine recession, or disguise inflation under creative language, they're not managing the economy. They're managing perception. But perception doesn't feed families or preserve freedom. Reality always wins. A society that values comfort over truth becomes easy to control because its people are too distracted to notice their decline. Peace cannot exist in a nation that lives on borrowed money and borrowed time. You can't fund social programs, military expansion, and economic stability all at once with money you don't have. That's not peace. That's postponing collapse. And when the system finally breaks, politicians will once again point outward, blaming foreign enemies for crises they created at home. If Europe truly wanted peace, it would wage war on its debt, not on diplomacy. It would confront its addiction to central banking and unsustainable welfare spending before pointing fingers at foreign powers. Because real peace doesn't come from intimidation, it comes from integrity. It comes from building economies that don't depend on manipulation, alliances that aren't based on fear, and currencies that are backed by value, not politics. Yet, instead of facing these truths, Europe's leaders have chosen to distract their citizens with narratives of external threat. It's easier to rally people against an enemy than to admit policy failure. But that strategy has an expiration date, and it always ends in the same place, with economic collapse leading to social unrest, and social unrest leading to real war. The irony is that peace is often used as a slogan by those who are destroying its foundation. They talk about stability while devaluing money. They speak of unity while dividing citizens through inequality and inflation. They promise prosperity while draining productivity. Every policy that distorts free markets, inflates currency, or rewards dependency weakens peace from within. Because a nation at war with economic truth is already at war with itself. The hook is powerful. You can't bomb your way to prosperity, but you can bankrupt your way to conflict. The road to every war is paved with economic denial. The true architects of peace are not politicians or generals. They are the producers, the savers, the innovators, and the workers who create real value. They are the people who live within their means, who build instead of borrow, who save instead of spend what they don't have. Every time an individual acts responsibly in an irresponsible system, they contribute to peace, because stability begins at the smallest level. The household, the business, the community, and expands outward. Economic truth scales up, deception collapses down. That's why societies that honor productivity over propaganda always find their way back to balance, no matter how dark the times become. Peace will never come from printing money or inflating illusions. It comes from nations that have the courage to live within their limits, to produce before they consume, and to lead through example rather than coercion. The strength of a country isn't measured by how much it can spend, but by how much it can sustain. And sustainability is built on truth, not just political truth, but economic truth. You can negotiate treaties and sign declarations, but if your economy is built on debt and deception, peace is only temporary. When the illusion ends, so does the calm. So when leaders promise peace while ignoring the arithmetic of reality, remember, peace and prosperity are not political slogans. They are economic conditions. You can't legislate them. You must earn them. A nation that faces truth, no matter how painful, will always outlast one that hides from it, because the foundation of peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of integrity. And the moment a society rediscovers that, it stops fearing collapse and starts rebuilding its strength from the ground up with truth as its most powerful weapon.